All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here today for our second workshop, Storytelling for Science, Communicating Value to Industry. I'm Abby Schnell. I'm a licensing associate with UIRF. My background is in pharmacology and physiology, and I have a couple years of business consulting experience from when I was a grad student. And now I've been with the UIRF for almost 4 years. And today I am joined by Kellen Sensor. Kellen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Abbey. So I'm Kellen Sensor, a senior associate director here at the UIRF. I've been in tech transfer for a little over 16 years, and my technical background is in uh, genetics and marketing.
Great. Well, we have a fairly small group today, so do feel free to unmute and ask questions or make comments throughout the presentation. If you all want, or if you all would rather just put those in the chat, that's fine as well. And then we should also have some time at the end for questions too. All right. And then last week, we talked a little bit about how industry thinks about problems and evaluates ideas. And now this week, we're going to transition from how industry thinks to how industry listens and how researchers can communicate their work in a way that resonates with industry audiences. In the coming week, we'll talk about networking and outreach and then navigating different industry partnership opportunities. These sessions are designed to build upon one another, but they can also stand alone. And so, no worries if you miss a session or can't make a session. We also do plan to record all the sessions, so feel free to reach out to me if you want to view a recording that you missed. And before we jump into the content of this presentation, I do want to briefly revisit this slide about the UIRF and our role, because the workshop series really kind of grounds itself in what the UIRF's role is. So UIRF is really a bridge between academia and industry, while researchers are focused mainly on new discoveries and new technologies. Industry is more focused on, further developing those technologies, manufacturing and scaling them. And so the UIRF is really like our role is connecting those two worlds. Um, So last week, we talked a bit about this secret stage of this commercialization process called the pre-disclosure stage that sits somewhere between research and disclosure. And that's when you can start considering how industry might evaluate the innovation that you're working on. And you can start refining your innovation so that it aligns more with what industry is looking for. The communication strategies that we're going to be talking about this week can be useful at that stage as well, if you're having some early interactions with industry, especially as your innovation is forming. But it can also happen at the marketing stage. This is when our office, we've already maybe protected any IP that needs protecting, and then we really make a big push, a big marketing push to try to identify a industry partner to take the technology forward. So rather than talk about like the marketing strategy and then talk about how you communicate, I thought we would talk about communication strategies first because it can be really good to be prepared before you start reaching out to industry partners. So with that context in mind, there are three main goals of today's workshop. The first is to highlight some differences that industry audiences have when they listen or communicate. They listen for, different signals or different key pieces of information versus academic audiences. The second goal is to show how you frame a message impacts how that message is received, especially in early interactions with industry or these really short conversations where you don't have a lot of time. And then the third goal is to introduce a few simple frameworks for how you can tell your story in a way that makes that conversation more effective. So the goal here isn't really to turn you into salespeople. It's more just to introduce you to some tools that you can use to help communicate your work clearly and effectively to industry audiences if engagement with those audiences makes sense for you. And then before we talk about different techniques, I thought it'd be good to kind of zoom out and talk about why communication between academic and industry audiences feels different. So in academic communication, we often really focus on, methodology, getting into the really technical information about what experiments did you perform, what models did you use, and that's in an effort to contribute to knowledge. You'll really get into the nuances of what your findings are. And that makes sense because who you're communicating to is often an expert in the field, or they at least have like some working knowledge of the field. So you can get into all of that technical information very quickly without explaining the background. Industry communication, on the other hand, tends to be oriented around relevance to a problem, clarity and speed, a discussion of, what the implications and outcomes are, and then industry audiences often have a decision in the back of their mind. They're listening to decide whether it's worth them learning more, investing more time, or taking the conversation forward. So neither approach is really better or worse, they're just different. And understanding that difference is the first step to communicating more effectively across that boundary. So, one place where this difference really shows up is in elevator pitches. So, when you're speaking to an industry audience, the goal of an elevator pitch should be to communicate the value proposition of what you're working on rather than getting into detail about the specifics of your research. So, a value proposition connects three main ideas: the problem being addressed and who is experiencing the problem, and then why your approach is meaningful or different. So if someone walks away understanding these three pieces, they don't need to fully understand the science quite yet, right? They just need to understand why they should care, and then that understanding will help to open the door to deeper conversation. So it's really just to get the conversation started, to give them the information that they need to know if this is something that they want to invest more time in learning more about. Okay, so I want to show, oops, sorry. I want to show a short video. This is a very like exaggerated account of how a researcher might communicate their idea, um, especially if it's like an early stage technology. So I just want you to think, like while you're watching this, put on your business hat. Imagine that you're a business professional and you're evaluating this technology and deciding if it's something that your company might be interested in, and then we can kind of think afterwards what your thoughts are. And I will warn you, this video is quite old and a little bit cheesy, but I think it's very relevant. So we'll just watch like the first minute and a half or so. Oh, it looks like some people can't hear the video. Was that happening for everyone? Okay. Um, hmm. Maybe let me try to share it on YouTube instead. Let's see if this works better. Um, do like a full screen. Um, here we go. See, I can't get to the full screen or the play button. There we go. Let's see if this works. Is it working now? So it's still not working for anyone? Hmm. Okay, I'm going to put the link in the chat. Um, we can move forward, I think, and then if you guys want to watch the video on your own time, definitely do that because I think it's worth watching. And then I will bring back up the slides. We will go to this one. Okay, and we'll jump back to that video. I think you'll get enough context in the next slide. Oh, Kellen, did you have something to add? No? Okay. Um, right. So the way that you want to structure an elevator pitch, and if you do want to go back and watch that video of an example of what not to do, I think that would add some more flavor to this. But what you really want to do is start with the problem and then briefly describe your solution to the problem and then say something about why that solution is meaningful or valuable. So it can look a little bit like this. You can say something like there's a challenge or a problem with X. Our lab is exploring Y, and this is important because Z. It doesn't always have to look like this. You can structure it a little bit differently, and this doesn't mean that you have to eliminate the science component completely. Like you do want to say a little bit about what your solution is. You just want to focus more on the value proposition and not get too overly technical because, again, the goal isn't to explain everything, it's more to just give enough information that invites more conversation.
Yeah, and Abby, I would jump in here um, just briefly to ask that folks think as you're building your elevator pitches about who your audience is. Um, an example I would give is as you're building your pitch out, um, there's as an example, like I said, a difference between building a pitch for investors or a company that's already in a field um, versus building a pitch for general investors who don't have experience in your field or your technical application uh, or a company that hasn't entered in yet, but is considering moving in to a field. Um, if you're speaking with people who already have experience in a sector, there's no need to give them market size, other market research information. They already have that. If you are speaking with folks who are new to an application, then that's maybe more helpful. But just consider who it is you're talking to and try to adjust accordingly.
Definitely. And I would say, like, depending on what industry it is, there are certain types of information that they'll be looking for. I know for like the pharmaceutical industry, since that's a category of technology that I work on a lot. They want to know right away what the target is, what the treatment modality is, and what the disease indication is. So you could just take that to whatever industry, you're looking in. If it's a medical device, they probably want to know the type of product and the disease indication. If it's something else, they want to know enough information that they can tell if that technology is a strategic fit for their company. Okay. So let's do a little poll. And this activity relates to the video. I basically took what the scientist in the video was talking about and created some new elevator pitches. So here's a few examples and take a look at all of them, and then I'm going to launch a poll so you can let us know which one you think is most effective. Let's see. All right, I'll give it 10 more seconds. Okay, and we had one misclick, C instead of B. So I'm going to end the poll and then share the results. So it looks like we had all B and D, which is good. I would say those were definitely the best pitches. I would tend to lean a little bit more towards D just because it does give a little bit of information about what the technology is versus B, which it just says a technology. So maybe a company might want to know a little bit more about what it is before they want to move the conversation forward. But it could also be good, if it's a really general conversation, this could be enough information to invite a few questions. So I think, yeah, both B and D are good options. So great, good work, gold stars all around. Okay, so moving on from elevator pitches to presentations. Business presentations can be quite different from the academic presentations that a lot of us are used to. In academic presentations, the purpose is really to share information and new findings, show what you're doing in your field that others might want to know about. The people that you're presenting to are often experts in the field or they have some working knowledge. And these presentations might take place in large conference rooms, auditoriums, really large settings where you have a big audience. They're very structured presentations. They start with an introduction and a lot of context before they get into the methodology, their data, and then a discussion of the interpretation of the data and conclusions, next steps. Like every scientific presentation kind of has that same structure, right? Um, Audiences for business presentations, on the other hand, they want an answer to a question, and they want that to be presented in a very straightforward and timely manner. Business audiences are often new to the field, or if they do have some knowledge of the field, they don't want to go into detail right away. They want to like focus on big picture, and they're often fairly busy people. You might have like a half hour call with them to start. So you do really need to take advantage of the time that you have with them and to communicate what they're wanting to hear early on to keep their interest. These meetings are smaller, more intimate gatherings, and then they really give emphasis to the key takeaways, which allows for discussion into more detail, or like the approach and data if necessary. It's to allow for discussion and more of a conversation rather than like a flat out presentation. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at structuring academic presentations versus business presentations. So, as I discussed in academic presentations, our instinct is to kind of go in the order that we did the work. We start with all of the background and the context, then we get into the experiments and our data, and then we'll talk about how we interpret that data and any conclusions that we have. So work is presented in the order that it was done. But the pyramid principle suggests leading with your answer or your main recommendation or solution, and then you can support it with some key arguments or evidence. This approach really matches the thinking patterns of business professionals, and then it helps you to communicate your work in a way that is concise and memorable and invites more questions and conversation. Yeah, Kellen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just step in here to say that this the difference here between the two strategies is something that we see a lot in our initial meetings with industry. Um, we maybe get 30 minutes to talk with the business team in an initial conversation, and we'll sit down. We'll do brief introductions uh, from the business side. I'll say just a couple of words about my role in trying to facilitate, um, and then turn it over to the researcher or researchers to speak, to introduce themselves. And they'll take that and launch into a 10 to 12 minute kind of origin story. Um, Usually a historical retrospective on the lab and lines of research that they work on, or more of an overarching look at attempts to address this problem through history. And that can be kind of disheartening in a conversation like that because you get to the end of the story and the researcher takes a breath and the people from industry kind of jump in and say, that's great. We have some questions we would like to talk to you about. And so now you're 15 minutes into a 30-minute meeting. You've taken half of your time, and you still haven't even gotten to the questions that the business people brought to the meeting, that were kind of the point of having the conversation. So I think this is a really good principle to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Kellen. So, does this mean that you have to kind of lead your presentation, like the very first slide of your presentation has to be the solution? So I don't think you do have to have that as your very first slide. You still can provide a little bit of a like intro and ease your audience into the answer, the key takeaway, or your solution, or whatever it is that you're showing to the company. And you can still do that and prioritize the takeaway. And one way that you can do that is the SCQA framework. So this is when you start with a description of the starting point or the situation. Then you talk about something that has changed, a complication or a catalyst of some sort. And if you've done these first two steps well, there will be a question in the mind of the audience. Often that question is something like, oh no, what do we do? How do we solve this problem? And then you're the hero that comes to the rescue with your solution to the problem. So this is a really nice, simple way to kind of set up the beginning of your presentation. And you can adjust the order of these steps if you would like, just to change the like urgency or the buildup. You could start with the complication if the situation is really obvious, for example, or you could put the question up on the slide, and then get into your solution and then a bit of background information about why that solution is good. So it really just depends on your situation and your technology and the best way to introduce that. But I think this is a really great kind of starting place. And then once you learn this well, then you can kind of go outside the box a bit. Okay, and then getting into like the slide design itself. So this is something that I'm very passionate about. I think that slide design is really important for a presentation. I think that it really helps your audience stay engaged and stay oriented into what you're talking about, and it can help really emphasize your key takeaways. So one way to make sure that your slides are doing their job is to test whether they pass the glance test. The glance test just means that it can somebody get the main idea of your slide by just glancing at it for a few seconds. So this slide, for instance, would not pass the glance test. The header is very generic. We don't know what the central argument is. The data aren't really ordered well. They're kind of just pasted onto the slide. And then there's a bunch of bullet points that don't really go with the figures. And then the figures are a bit too small too. They lack context. You can't really read some of the labels. So overall, this slide just does not do a great job of communicating your key takeaway. Now, you might do that really well while you're talking about it, but it does help if your slide does the same job, and then it just makes the takeaway a bit more memorable. So this is a way that you could restructure this slide so that it would pass the glance test. So we've changed a few things here. The title is more informative, and the title is a really great place where you can just put your key takeaway. You don't have to hide behind, fancy language. Like you can just put your key takeaway in your header. Whatever you want your audience to know, just put it there. That makes things easy. And then next would come anything that's medium priority. So any main arguments that support your key takeaway. And then last would be any sub-arguments or data, which is the lowest priority. So this slide does a good job because it has the key takeaway. It has these medium priority arguments that are grouped more logically. There's only relevant data here, right? Anything that's maybe interesting but irrelevant has been removed. And just, the stuff that's necessary for the slide is here, and that's all. So I think this does a much better job of communicating the message in a clear and concise way. Kellen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just say quickly, I just encourage everyone to build your slides for your purpose. Do customize them as needed. Um, and to your point about uh, kind of narrowing the focus on an individual slide, I just want to assure everyone that there is always time later for a comprehensive technical discussion. That will always happen, usually in the second conversation after you've talked with the business folks and convince them. There will be additional conversations with all the technical experts on the other side, and you'll have plenty of time to get through all the details once you reach that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're unsure about, what amount of data or information to include in like your first slide deck for that initial call with the company, feel free to reach out to us. We do have a slide deck template for those first calls. It's very short, I think like 10 to 12 slides or so, maybe not even that many. Um, but it has the Iowa branding, all the different smart art and formatting that you can just put in your information and be good to go, rather than, trying to take one of your academic presentations and like skip through slides to get to the points that you think are most relevant. I think redesigning a slide deck for this purpose would be really helpful. And we, of course, can help you do that too if you just want to give us your data and then we can put it into our slide deck. We're happy to help and work with you on that. Okay, and then if you've designed your slides well, presenting them will be, I think, a lot easier. And you'll want to think of your presentation as telling a story, right? We've talked about a few different kind of storytelling frameworks, the value proposition, elevator pitch structuring, the SCQA framework. There's a couple other kind of techniques that you can use in combination with these, and this is especially useful in these slide presentations. Um, You'll want to kind of make sure that you give your audience time to let ideas sink in, really let them marinate with information that you're presenting. At the same time, you don't want to be too slow that they get bored and their mind wanders. So I think pacing can be really important. Transitions. I think that this is really underrated. Transitions from slide to slide so that your audience can follow along with your presentation and your thinking, that things have like a logical flow to them. Making sure that you highlight key points continuously, like always bring up your key takeaway. So you can do that with your slide design, and then you can do that verbally throughout your presentation as well. And a well-paced presentation that's really story-driven will keep your audience engaged. It will make sure that you communicate what's important, what they really want to know, and it'll make sure that your message really sticks with them. And then, of course, it will hopefully invite more conversations as well. Okay, and then actually, I think that I figured out the video thing, so I'm going to try that one more time. So I think what I did was I didn't share my computer sound. Um, I'm a Zoom expert. Okay, let's see. Um, Share sound. Then back to this. Let's see if this works.
Hey, I've got a great idea for a business.
That's exciting. Tell me about it.
I've developed a chemical isomer that links to volatile organic compounds causing carbon bonds to rupture and wraps them in a nanotube coating.
Huh.
Yes. Oops. Sorry about
That's
that.
a little confusing. Can you dumb it down for me?
Sure. What I do is I take a proprietary isomer that I developed with a picric acid wash that hollows out the carbon bonds and replaces them with a nanotube wrapping.
Okay, so I guess it's pretty technical.
Oh yeah. I've been working on this isomer for 9 years.
So what's the business idea?
To sell it,
To who?
everybody will want one,
What for?
so they can wrap their volatile organic compounds in carbon nanotubes.
I think you might need a target customer. I don't think I need to wrap my compounds in your nanotube.
Well, maybe not you.
So, for people who buy it, what's the value you are providing them?
I've developed a chemical isomer that links to volatile organic compounds causing carbon bonds to rupture and wraps them in a nanotube coating.
You've said that already.
All right, so we get the point. Can anybody tell what the value proposition was of that technology? I definitely can't. I have no idea what problem that's supposed to be solving. All right, so getting back to our optional homework assignment. So I think this will be a really great little translational activity between this workshop and next week's workshop. So totally optional, you don't have to do this, but if you would like to, try to identify one company that might care about the problem that your research is aiming to address, and consider why your solution to the problem might be relevant or valuable to them. And then next week, you'll hear from Parker and Hojab about different outreach strategies and how to network with industry and using LinkedIn and all of that good stuff. So again, we've covered understanding industry needs and storytelling for science. Next week, we'll hear about engaging with industry, and then the following week, navigating some different industry partnership opportunities. And with that, we can take any questions that anyone might have. So feel free to unmute or put a question in the chat if you have any. Or if not, we can end a little bit early, and feel free to connect with us individually, follow up if you have any questions. If you want to take a little bit of time to sit with the content and you think of something, we're always happy to connect one-on-one with anyone who wants to learn more. So thank you all for your attention, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.